Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Jazz is Not What You Think, the podcast that delves deep into the world of jazz with your host, Michael Fagan. This week, Michael sits down with Terence Blanchard and director Dorsay Alavi to discuss her new film, Zero Gravity, a film about Wayne Shorter, which plumbs into the depths of the man behind the legend. Terence and Dorsay discuss the movie and the major role Wayne played in their lives. But before we dive in, we'd like to give a shout out to the sponsor of this episode, the Jazziz Vinyl Club. Picture this, jazz aficionados. As a member of the Jazziz Vinyl Club, you'll receive not one, not two, but 4 premium edition 180-gram vinyl albums carefully curated by the Jazziz editors. These albums feature tracks from jazz legends and today's top artists handpicked just for you. And here's the cherry on top. These vinyl gems will be delivered to your doorstep 4 times a year. It's like Christmas for jazz lovers all year round. But wait, there's more. Each vinyl album comes complete with liner notes penned by Jazziz writers, offering you a deeper dive into the music and the artist behind it. And let's not forget the custom design album cover that makes these vinyl albums true collector's items. So if you're ready to enrich your jazz collection with the finest tunes and exclusive vinyls, look no further than the Jazziz Vinyl Club. It's the club where music lovers and vinyl enthusiasts unite. This is Jazz Is Not What You Think.
Hello, everyone. We are here today with Terence Blanchard and Dorsay Alavi to talk about this new incredible film documentary that you absolutely have to see called Zero Gravity. It's all about Wayne Shorter and more. Welcome, guys. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in the Amazon description, I'm just going to read it because it tells part of the story, and there's obviously so much more. Zero Gravity is a cinematic ode to jazz legend Wayne Shorter from executive producer Brad Pitt and directed by Dorsay Alavi. Depicted in 3 portals, which I thought was really clever. The viewer is transported into prolific periods of Shorter's life and how through adversity he grew to greatness, shattered the limitations of jazz, and became one of the most influential musicians and composers in American music. Pretty a mouthful, but tells part of the story, I guess, because I was incredibly moved. I have to tell you, Dorsay, that I know I'm going to sound like a geek when I say this, and Terence, please don't laugh, but I was watching it on a big screen, computer screen with headphones so I could get the audio. And literally after the 3rd episode, when it was over, I'm by myself and I'm clapping. I mean, it was that moving and emotional. And everyone I've told to go watch this, it's a must see, has the same reaction. The one thing that Wayne said early in the movie that I thought was a very sort of essential part of not only the movie but his being was, and I quote, "There are 2 great events in one's life. One is being born and the other is knowing why."
That's actually a quote from Tennessee Williams that Wayne loved.
That Wayne liked.
He liked it so much, and he used it often. I think that encapsulated everything in his life and his pursuit of his spiritual life. So it made sense to start with that quote.
Well, it sounded very natural coming from him. And, Terence, one of the things that, you made some really good commentary during and on the film. One that I really loved is how I was introduced to Wayne and didn't get it initially. And that was through Weather Report.
Yeah.
And I would listen to Weather Report, and like all of us, I loved Weather Report, but didn't quite get Wayne. Obviously, he was a great saxophonist, and everyone in the band was just spectacular. It wasn't until I started learning about Wayne, listening to music much before Weather Report and after Weather Report, that really understood the essential role he had in Weather Report. But as one of the music critics, and you said it as well, people were saying, why is Wayne doing this? Because he's not like the featured artist, and no one knows what songs he wrote and he didn't write. You want to comment on that, Terence?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think for me, what got me about that group was it points to Wayne's interest in music in general. It's not about him being the star, being the front man. It was really about the collaboration between all 4 of those guys, and sometimes 5. Um, it showcased to me his willingness to, like he always says, how do you practice the unknown? You know, but it showcased his willingness to go out there and step out there. Dr. Cornel West said something that I thought applies to Wayne specifically. He said jazz musicians always stepped out on nothing expecting something. And that's what I felt throughout Wayne's career, And when you see what happened with Wayne after Weather Report, when he had his quartet, it makes it even more important to me, because when he finally put the quartet together, where he was leading his own band, finally, after so many years, you know, even though obviously he was the musical and spiritual leader of that group, you could tell even then it was still about the music. It was all about what was supposed to be conveyed to an audience and how, you know, how the audience would relate to what it is that they were doing.
Yeah, it really it said so much to me, because I felt that way back listening to Weather Report, but coming back full circle, it now made all sense. The Dorsay, I did want to say that we all love Wayne not only as a person but as one of the greatest musicians of all time. But the movie, you don't have to like jazz to like the movie, love the movie. I think what happens is, because of the movie, you will be brought into jazz and want to know why, the why question that we always ask. And Wayne so beautifully brings you into that. He reminds me of almost like a spiritual leader, that by getting people to understand the spirituality, you don't have to hit them over the head. You just kind of mention a couple of things. And as you guys know better than anyone, in the few times that I was blessed to talk to Wayne, he's a man of very few words, but listen to those words very carefully.
Absolutely. Not a word wasted with Wayne. Real thought. And he's so introspective. And so when he speaks, there's always something profound that comes out of it. And sometimes you miss it the first time and you have to really think about it and you realize how profound it is later. And
Danilo, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, absolutely. I was going to say, he wasn't preachy and he wasn't proselytizing at all. He led by example.
Never.
Yeah, and Danilo mentions that, where he's in the one great part of the movie where he's talking about how he didn't get this movie, that Wayne, you got to see this movie, and he watches the movie and he's like, I don't get it. Kind of go back and check it out again, and there's just one little part that said it all, and that the light bulb went off. The creation, the production of this movie is also fascinating, in that it brings you into, for lack of a better phrase, Wayne's world, in a way that, with the kind of psychedelic and animation things that are so essential part of this, but the fact that Wayne was very much an artistic and a visual person. Joni Mitchell talks about this in your movie, where he literally had a visual of things. He was a visual artist, kind of like a Beethoven and a Debussy, which is who she referenced. How is it working with him? Because I know, and you may want to step back and tell us, you've been working on this project for several years. The fact that it's out now, right after Wayne's passing, this is something that you have been working on when he was very much not only alive, but thriving as a musician.
Yes, well, we started in 2002. The conversations began then. He had called me because he was so excited about his orchestral collaborations with his quartet. And I said, we really need to start documenting all of this. So I actually started documenting in 2002, but I really delved into the documentary in 2013. And that's when I started raising funds and putting the whole thing together. And it just grew and grew and grew. And so we completed it really in late 2018. And as you know, things took a while to get it released, and COVID hit. But yeah, it's been a very long process. And I've had the privilege of being very close to him and his life. And I was able to observe his personal life, his music, and his spiritual life, because I'm also a Buddhist.
Wow. And so, you and I were in the Verve group at the same time, um, doing
Oh,
very different things. We had I had a little boutique label with Lee Ritenour, and you were there doing I think some things in film or video back in the early
I
'90s.
yes, I was a music video director then. And so my agent called me and said, Verve wants to hire you to do a video for Wayne Shorter. At the time, I didn't know who Wayne Shorter was. I listened to jazz, but I wasn't that savvy. But when I went and met Wayne, I was like, wow, I really missed out on knowing who he was. And so it was a great discovery, and our friendship developed at that point as well. And he took me into his life. So I did the video, but I also gained such a deep friendship with Wayne Shorter for so many years from it.
Wow. Music selection on the movie. Again, as I mentioned, I listened to it with headphones because I wanted to get the audio. Um, great track selection, soundtrack. Who made those choices?
Me. I
And
went with what spoke to me and what felt appropriate for what I was trying to convey. And I kind of understood where Wayne was historically, and I sort of aligned it to what he was creating musically. So that sort of led me as well. And I also chose pieces that were more cinematic. I wanted things that I could actually put, visually translate. So a lot of the pieces that I chose, and then there were historical significance and things that we wanted to showcase. Obviously the quartet being one of them. Some of those performances were mind blowing, and I shot some of those myself. So I knew which ones I wanted to use because I could feel the energy on the stage when I was shooting those performances, and I knew which ones really made an impact. And that's how I chose everything.
and then the one kind of fast forward, and I don't want to be a spoiler here, but the last performance that you show with Esperanza Spalding. Tell me about that because I hadn't seen that before. It was done somewhere in Poland, and
Yeah,
with
at,
a Polish orchestra.
yeah, at the Solidary Arts Festival in Poland, and it was, it was difficult to get footage of Wayne with orchestras because there's a whole, licensing aspect of it. We needed to get permission. It's very costly. So Esperanza was working with them at the time, and she said, they're going to shoot this concert. And I said, can we use it in the film? Because for me to be able to get this concert would just cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Mhm.
So they agreed and they allowed me to use that, performance. And because I wanted something that represented Wayne's collaboration with Esperanza, and Gaia was the perfect piece.
Yeah, you know, and anytime I would talk to Esperanza, and Wayne came up in conversation, she would just melt. I mean, literally, it was like we'd talk about Wayne, and she go, "Oh, Wayne." There was this connection that they had that was incredible. But it also reminded me, and I think you allude to it in the film a bit, and that is he was a father figure to a lot of people, having lost a daughter and sort of taking on the role, that fatherhood to
Yeah.
so many people, not just as a iconic musician, but
Mhm.
as a human being.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think that Wayne is a mentor to many people. And Esperanza in particular, I think because she came in the latter part of his life and they just clicked together. They understood each other. She's very much like him in some ways. So I think the music that they created together was very special, but I also think that he was her spiritual mentor. He was like a father figure and a collaborator. So it was it was all encompassing.
So Terence, obviously knew Wayne very well, and
Mhm.
I've been following your career. I mean,
Mhm.
I can't remember were there any albums that I had before Blanchard Harrison on back in the Columbia days, but I've been following you since then.
Mhm.
Literally every album,
Mhm.
and like many, I love your music. But he was
Thank you.
also, as you're quite welcome, and he was also, I know, somewhat of a inspiration to you obviously why you're in the film. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Wayne was a huge inspiration to me, man. I met him when I was playing with Art Blakey, and we would constantly have conversations whenever I would see him. And then when I started working with the Monk Institute, he became like a mentor to me because, I would see him all of the time. And one of the things, like Dorsay said, when you talk to Wayne, it wasn't that he was preaching. It wasn't that. He was just such a brilliant force. He would talk to you about things he was interested in, and you'd wind up getting a lesson about life in the process. It's just the way that he was. I saw him, I'll never forget, he really changed my life when we were in New Orleans at the Jazz Fest, and I was in his dressing room, and he told me a story about this woman who was having problems auditioning. The basis of the story was her mother told her it takes courage to be happy, and I'll never forget at the end of that conversation, man, he went on stage to play, and I was just sitting there like, wow, that statement just resonated in my head. Like, right, it takes courage to be happy. And I kept trying to find happiness through my career, through other things, and that really turned everything around for me, And then later, when I became a Buddhist too, working with Herbie, um, that was a whole nother level of communication that we had, because then it became about, the eternal vibration, the things that we always try to lock into every day, and how do we manifest that into something positive to help other people grow and heal. And all of that came from Wayne. Wayne and Herbie, but Wayne, man. I'll tell you a funny story. When we were auditioning the Monk Kids, the auditioners were Herbie Hancock, Wayne Short, and myself. And I was glad I was the auditioner and not the auditionee. Because Wayne would ask questions, man. And, he would ask the kids questions. And Herbie and myself were like, damn. He had us thinking, man, and we couldn't hide it because that's just how profound he is, But he's always been that person for a lot of us, and it was one of the reasons why with my last record, man, I wanted to do an album dedicated to him. I wanted to show him how much we loved him, how much of an influence he had on all of us. And I got to tell you this too. We had a beautiful moment where I had taken my band and the Turtle on the String Quartet to his home to kind of get his blessing about the project before we went into the studio. And to a man, everybody, when we left Wayne's home, they all came up to me and said, thank you. And that's not something most people say, but the experience of being around him was so profound and had such an impact on everybody that day that they were grateful for the experience. That's the type of guy Wayne was.
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up something actually very funny in the movie because I witnessed it. Whenever Wayne and Herbie are together, it's like we're all in the conversation, but they are having their own conversation, their own understanding.
Yes. Listen, man, I'm telling you, when those kids were auditioning that day, I felt bad for each and every one of them because Wayne would ask a question and they would sit down and go, oh, okay, let me see. How do I deal with that? It was a profound moment, man. But at the same time, he wasn't trying to really test anybody. That's just the way he was. He wasn't trying to trick anybody or do anything like that. That's just the way he operated and the way he vibrated in the world.
I think he made us think. It was sort of like it's not so simple. Think about this, and yet I think whether it was his Buddhism, whether it seems like this is the way he was born. He was wired from the and you do. Dorsay, you do such a beautiful job in bringing him from, a young boy, all the way through his life. And then as things got sad and dark with the death of his daughter, you see how this very special human deals with infirmity, adversity, tragedy.
He endured enough tragedy in a decade that gave him enough emotional intelligence for a lifetime, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I think, I don't mean to cut you off, so I'm sorry, but
No worries. Go ahead.
one of the things that I took from all of this, is that all of us as musicians, we analyzed Wayne analytically. All of his compositions, we took them apart. You know, structurally he did this, harmonically he did this, rhythmically he did this. But one of the things that I took from this documentary, more so than anything, after watching the entire thing, was all of those compositions that we looked at intellectually were statements of love and affection for somebody he cared about. You know, it just so happened that that was the level of genius that he operated at. It wasn't like something, they never felt like musical exercises, And when I started to understand the level of tragedy that he's had in his life and how that started to manifest itself into how his Buddhist philosophy was still about like, go further, continue, try to find your highest potential. That, man, that turned me around and changed my life too, because the technique and the theory is there to serve a higher purpose. It's not there for the sake of itself, of let me see what complicated thing I can do. No, it's not that at all. It's totally the other way around. The more and more you develop your craft and develop all of the tools you have at your disposal, the more you can speak on a profound level without even thinking about it, without even making that your purpose.
Well, he always said the human being behind the instrument was of the utmost importance.
Exactly.
And the instrument is the vehicle, it's the vessel, it's the tool that you use to communicate. And so by raising people's frequency through sound, he got messages through beyond the five senses. And that's why sometimes people had a transcendent experience when they listened to his music. And I think a lot of that came through in I Call Portal 3. After the tragedy, his powerful wisdom came through in the sounds that he was creating and the compositions that he wrote. And so in many ways, he found ways to heal himself, but as a result, he created sounds that healed others. And that's what I found really remarkable in the latter part of his life.
When you speak about healing people, I have to tell you this one story.
Sure.
I'm the artistic director at the Paradise Jazz Series in Detroit, and we brought Wayne in. It was one of his last concerts there. And I'll never forget it. It was to a packed house. And he came out on stage. And, Wayne was notorious for never looking back at all, right? And he came out on stage and he played the little quote from the blues that he recorded with Miles Davis. Bitty little, he just played that phrase and the crowd went crazy, right? They screamed, they cheered. It was one of the most miraculous moments I've ever seen in that hall, but it harkened back to me about what we were just talking about. That was Wayne trying to heal people and relate to people on a level way past music. He knew what that phrase would do and the power that it would bring to the moment. And then it allowed him to go further into his own music and have the audience right there with him at every turn. It was a miraculous thing to witness.
Yeah. One of the things that I really just was very moving in the movie is that, and Herbie said this, and it kind of is a reflection of what you just talked about in his music and giving and healing. And Herbie, I could tell he was a little tearful when he was saying this, and that is when he was hurting the most, what he cared most about is how everyone else was feeling.
Yep.
And I find that so Wayne Shorter.
Yes. I mean, go ahead.
Well, it goes back to his Buddhist philosophy that we're all connected. We're all one organism in a way. And so her passing affected so many people and they were all in it together. And he took it upon himself to be present for all of them to help heal them as well.
Yeah. And his that one clip that you found about him talking about his wife's passing in the tragic airplane explosion, that he was going to be the widower because he needed strength and that it was almost planned that way, where someone with strength like Wayne needed to be the one to deal with this and deal with his pain and everyone else's pain.
He was
Yeah.
a
Remarkable.
miraculous man, you know. And I think this is the thing that needs to be stated too. One of the things that those guys have taught me because of our Buddhist practice is that Wayne is a great musician, but that's not all of who he was. You know what I mean? The music was a part of a bigger story, you know, and we're talking about that now, him as a person and how he could really affect others' lives, you know, because, you know, listen, man, I'm a jazz musician and I was a jazz geek from the time I was 16 years old. So sometimes we could get caught up in the celebrity and the fame of these guys, you know. But the thing that was always great about Wayne was he broke all of that down, you know, and he wanted people to understand that we're no different. We're all the same. We're all in the same part. Like Dorsay said, we're all part of the same vibration, you know. And it was his mantra. That was the thing he talked about to me a lot. And he made me realize the music was just a portion of that. It wasn't the entirety. It was just a portion of who he was as a person.
Absolutely.
Wow. So there was, Neil deGrasse Tyson's in the movie multiple times. I didn't understand the relationship that they had. Did you know more about that?
Well, Wayne was a huge fan of Neil's,
Mhm.
and he always wanted to meet Neil. And when I found out that Neil actually liked Wayne's music, I thought I need to bring them together. So I arranged an interview with Neil first. And then when we started talking about Wayne, he realized he knew much more than he thought he did. He said, "Tell me about this," because he was a big fan of Bitches Brew. So he didn't know that some of those compositions that he really revered were Wayne's. And so I let him know that. And then he had to explain his experience with Fail. And then I said, okay. And they said, "Can we do Star Talk with Wayne?" And I said, absolutely. And then we invited Herbie. And then that's the first scene that you see when he's looking at Wayne's comic books is truly that I had just shown him Wayne's comic book. And he couldn't believe that Wayne was drawing rocket ships in the 50s. And that's where his head was back then. And he was really excited about sharing it on Star Talk. And that's how it all started.
Well, the interesting thing about the comic book, it's not just any comic book. You would assume you're going to take a look at it, and okay, this is as good as comic books get. The illustrations were so beautiful and perfect. He could have been a comic book illustrator with no question about his talent there. It's just one of the many, the visual thing that Joni Mitchell talks about is that he had this visual ability to see things and then turn them into music. And I find that absolutely brilliant. In fact, I'm sure you know the story about when he performed on Steely Dan's title track of Asia. I mean, I don't think anyone on earth could have done that type of incredibly difficult, beautiful musical solo without having some kind of visual on how it's going to turn out and execute it literally on the fly.
Wayne was such a visual guy, man. When I was at the Monk Institute, we got him to come in and work with the kids for a week, man. And I'll never forget it because there was one statement Wayne made to the kids. We talk about it still to this day. Now this gives you an idea about his visual prowess. He told the band, "I want you to sound like a wounded tiger walking through the woods."
Yeah.
Yeah, and you capture that in the film with the Joni Mitchell tune where he says, play like you're a bird, and he does it.
Yeah.
That's the kind of direction that great directors give actors. So Wayne was an innate filmmaker. I think he made movies without pictures, is what he always said. So I think that's the kind of direction, a great director will say to an actor, rather than telling them how to say the line, they'll tell them, "Give me this feeling," and it'll be an analogy to something else.
But not only a great film director, he was a great film fan.
Yeah, he's a cinephile.
Oh my God. I
Yeah.
mean, you could talk to him about all of these old movies. As a matter of fact, you had to keep up because sometimes Wayne would tell you a story and he'd be talking about a movie you'd never seen before.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you illustrate that beautifully in the movie. That he's no doubt he's a cinema nut, and of course, as a visual guy, this all makes sense.
Mhm.
Well,
Well, I
cinema,
tell you,
music. That's how he
yeah.
found out about music, was through pictures. So it makes sense, and he kept that alive throughout his life. It was what inspired him most.
So Dorsey, tell us the how Brad Pitt got involved. I think people would want to know that because he's obviously a household name, and the way I understand it, he was duly impressed with not only what you did in the early stages of the film, but with Wayne.
So Brad came in after I had finished the film.
Mhm.
He was invited to a screening. We had a private screening for some of our donors, and he was invited. And he kind of said to me, because he knew it was 3 hours long, he said, I can only stay for the first one. I have an appointment. So he watched the first one, and then he came over to me and just kept saying, "This is great. This is great." And then he stayed for the second one, and then he stayed for the third one. And he said, "This is so incredible." And he wanted to write everything Wayne said down. Loved the film because for him, it was more cinematic. And he's not a big doc fan, but he said, "This felt like a movie to me. I love everything Wayne said," and he knew Wayne's music, but not as much. So I think he was impressed with the story and Wayne and so many things, and offered to help us. And so we got in touch later, and I said, "Well, what do you think about coming on board as a producer?" And he said, "I'd be honored." And then asked me if I wanted Plan B to come on board, and I said sure. And they watched it and they loved it, and that's how that began.
Wow, that's great. And Terence, you were how did you and Terence, you and Dorsey together?
Oh, she called me. I heard
Mhm.
about the documentary and I wasn't trying to overstep, but I kept saying, man, it would be great and it'd be an honor to be a part of it. And next thing I know, I got a call and I'm in California sitting in the house with a microphone and a camera in front of my face talking about Wayne Shorter. And it was a great experience, because I always viewed Wayne as one of the most unsung heroes in American culture. You know, in the jazz world, we had kind of we had crowned Duke Ellington and Thelonious Monk as our great composers, and I think Wayne was the next iteration of that type of power that he'd had in his music in terms of reaching out well beyond the realms of jazz. I mean, so to be a part of this for me was just an extreme pleasure and a huge honor to just be mentioned in it.
You're
Oh, that's
wonderful in it, Terrence. He contributed so much. Some of my favorite lines come from you. Some of the things. I mean, I couldn't fit everything in there,
Well,
but I think you made a wonderful contribution, and you understood Wayne's music, but you also understood Wayne as a human being and as a mentor, and that was really valuable to have.
thank you. Thank
yeah.
you.
I could ditto that. I mean, it's what I loved about your part in the film is you covered a lot. You covered his humor,
Mhm.
his artistic mastery, and his humanity,
Yeah.
and that you come full circle, and I thought it was really well done. The whole film is just I'm not just saying this because I have you on the podcast today. I tell everyone I know that it's a must see.
Oh,
There are very few films I say that, but
yes.
you don't have to love jazz, but I like I said in the beginning, I think after you see this, you'll not only love Wayne Shorter, you're going to want to know more about everything he did and everything he touched, and
Mhm.
and and jazz in general. It's something that brings you in to essentially the world of Wayne Shorter and the world of jazz. And I thank you so much for doing that.
And
Oh,
I tell you one thing that happened at
Sure.
we had a screening when Dorsay just had finished the project, and there was a bunch of us there, musicians and stuff. And Don was sitting right next to me, right?
Mhm.
And we watched all three portals, And I'll never forget, man, because I know how affected I was watching it. I know the type of impact, and I was sitting there just trying to take it all in at, when it ended. And Don looked at me and he said, "Man, what did we just experience?" That's the type of power that the project had, on us, and I think you're correct. I don't think you have to be a Wayne Shorter fan to really be impacted by this documentary, because it goes well beyond music, man. It, like we've been saying, music is a portion of it, and that was the manifestation of his love for humanity, right? But the entire documentary is about him, about who he was as an entire person, because the stuff that you see in the beginning from his childhood is stuff that I didn't really know, that you can tell really had an impact on who he became as a person. And then as you just move along throughout the documentary, there's just countless examples for anyone in life to understand how to deal with tragedy, how to deal with tough circumstances, and still find beauty in the world throughout all of those experiences. It's just a phenomenal thing to experience.
Well, thanks so much, Terence, and you capture that just wonderfully in the film. And like I said, it is a must see. And so, what's next? So let's start with you, Terence. What? Let's talk about Terence Blanchard. What's on the horizon for you? What you working on these days?
Ooh, well, I'm not working on much right now because the strike is going on,
Right,
But I've been on tour with Herbie Hancock, man. I'm loving that. And then I just became the artistic director at SF Jazz. So that's taken up a good chunk of my time. And I'm still touring
that's
with my
right.
yeah.
Well,
I'll be in Europe.
congratulations on SF Jazz.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll be in Europe later on with my group. And then we're going to start working on another project for the E Collective.
Fantastic. Dorsay, how about you? What next? I mean, this is hard to top. I mean, it's you done. I know it's not only going to be critically acclaimed. I think once we get the word out, you get the word out, everyone gets the word out. This is going to be a movie that's talked about for a long time, not just in the jazz world. So what's next?
Well, first, it's so important. I want to comment on the film itself. The reason we focused on Wayne as a human being is because his impact on so many people has been vast. And I feel a man's life story that's that rich. Everybody needs to see it, not just music fans. So that was the intention, and I'm glad you said that. For me, I am a narrative filmmaker. I'm not a documentary filmmaker, so I am going back to my narrative roots. And I've been working on a series that I've written, and I'm going to start developing that. That's my next one. Although I keep getting asked to do other music docs, so I might get tempted. We'll see.
And actually, I wanted to tell you guys, and Dorsay knows this, and Dorsay, you may have the date, but we're actually going to do a screening of the film at SF Jazz. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Well, we look forward to all your future endeavors. First and foremost, right now, you got to go watch this film. It will change your. I have an identical twin brother who I told him, you got to stop what you're doing tonight and watch this. He literally called me up and he said, this film will change people's lives.
Yes, I believe that. I do.
And thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Same for
Pleasure
me.
to have you.